Okay, thanks very much for attending this session. Basically, what I'm going to be covering today is Visual Studio 2010 and SharePoint 2010. My name is Jeremy Thake. I work at Redify as a principal consultant. I'm commonly seen on Twitter under the jthake tag. I blog at wss.madefuller.net, and I actually also facilitate the SharePoint Dev Wiki, which is a collaborative place to share information on SharePoint development and also on SharePoint administration too. So the SharePoint Conference 2009 was based in Las Vegas and had over 7,000 attendees with 250 sessions over 3.5 days. And they had tracks for information worker and IT pro and developers, lots of stuff around vendors in a vendor room, and even the ability to go and speak to the product team and MVPs at the RC Expert Day, as well as hands-on labs, and the ability to meet all of the people in the SharePoint universe. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that I got a lot of value out of being at that conference, and I think I'd really like to commend Microsoft for putting that on, and also would definitely go again if that was the case. And I think I just wanted to make that clear because a lot of people get very disgruntled about conferences and not getting any value out of them, and I definitely got lots of value out of that one. So SharePoint 2010 has had a new wheel implemented now, with various different things, and what I'm going to cover today is just one area of this, which is around business connectivity services. So I'm not going to go into this wheel, but there are resources in this session where you'll be able to go and find out more about all of those 6 areas. Just to cover off from a perspective of SharePoint 2010 is there's a lot more out of the box you get in terms of as a SharePoint developer now, with the ability to have the F5 experience when debugging and tuning with the developer dashboard, the ability to develop directly on a Windows 7 or Vista environment, as well as having a Server 2008 or 2008 R2 operating system. And now using Visual Studio 2010 with the out-of-the-box SharePoint tools, you have something very close, or to be honest, I'm getting to the point now where it's even better than the WSP Builder open source tool that we currently use in SharePoint 2007. The other additional thing which has been a big driver is the fact now that we have this rich platform for services, mainly around integration with line of business integration and some advantages around workflow, especially in the SharePoint designer space, with the ability to export workflows and bring those into Visual Studio 2010 to extend them further, which you can never used to be able to do in 2007. And also even more ways of accessing that data. The other neat area from a development perspective is around the application lifecycle management. So we have full integration with TFS with the out-of-the-box SharePoint 2010 toolkit, and that covers off standardized solution packaging within that tool, very much like how WSP Builder and WSS work inside 2007. You can also deploy straight from that environment directly into the development environment you're working in, very much like WSP Builder and VSE WSS, but just the advantage is that it's a lot faster and there's a lot more feedback now in the output window when you're doing these things. This slide really shows you how you can leverage SharePoint. You can typically use it as a business collaboration platform where you deal with SharePoint documents, but you can also do things like use line of business application data and service that up and make SharePoint your presentation layer, which is very powerful. Or you can start doing single web part solutions and building mashups where different web parts talk to different other web parts. And on the very advanced levels, you can start leveraging things like this, creating your own custom service applications to build extremely powerful applications that leverage a lot of the server technology that's all rigged up there for you, and all you need to do is build the plumbing around it. I think the key important thing before I touch on BCS is the fact that once things get into SharePoint, you can actually start consuming them very easily, either by the server object model as you can in the current version of 2007, but also now at the server side you can use link by using the SP metals to generate your strongly typed classes to access your list data. On the client side now, these are very new for SharePoint 2010. You have a client object model which can be leveraged by JavaScript, can be leveraged by Silverlight, and can also be leveraged by .NET CLR, which allow you to access things that you typically would have to have gone to a web service or to the server object model to get at. And the other extremely powerful thing is that now it supports the REST API for accessing information via REST with simple straight URLs, which is extremely powerful for all sorts of different ways of consuming data from within SharePoint. So before we get into the demo, just to give you a bit of an idea, Business Connectivity Services is a extension of the Business Data Catalog, or the BDC as it was known in SharePoint 2007. It's not a replacement, it actually builds on BDC, because you still have to create your business data catalogs, but there's just more tools available for you for building these business connectivity services, such as SharePoint Designer experience and an improved experience with Visual Studio. The other key thing is it's now allows you to write back the data as well as being able to read the data, and it's available inside SharePoint Foundation, whereas the BDC was only available in the enterprise version of SharePoint 2007. You can see here as an example what they tend to use for consumption is around .NET line of business data, web services, Windows Communication Foundation services, straight to a SQL database or an Oracle database via ODBC or any connections like that, or even out to the cloud and consuming web services outside of your organization. Once they're inside SharePoint, you actually have the ability to control things like security and deploy these models via solution packaging, and you get all of the out-of-the-box UI that you would get if it was a first-party citizen as a SharePoint list. And because of that, you can then leverage it against all the rest of the areas of the SharePoint platform. And also on top of that, you can access this information from within Outlook, from in Word, and from inside SharePoint workspaces, which actually allows you to pull this line of business data offline, which is extremely powerful and extremely compelling for an enterprise solution. So now we're going to go just straight into the demo where I'm going to demonstrate business connectivity services. Okay, so what I'm going to show you is how we can use the business connectivity services in SharePoint 2010 to go and access data from other data sources that you wouldn't be able to do via SharePoint Designer. So I'm going to start off just by going into Visual Studio 2010, creating a new project, and we're going to select the Business Data Connectivity Model template project. And I'm actually going to change this to the cars BDC model project because we're going to do some fun with some cars data. Now my server is going to be hooked up here so that we're debugging here against SharePoint 2010, so that's my URL, and you'll notice that we can only deploy the solution package as a farm solution, not as a sandbox solution, because things need to be put into the farm for execution. So what this gives us straight away is a design service to work with, and you'll immediately see that there's some extra panels that we need to prop up, which are available inside here with the BDC Explorer and the BDC method details. So I'm just going to expand these in here, and this is the typical view you'll be using, and the idea is that when you click on the context of the entity you're working with, is you're going to get your context in here. Now immediately what it's done is it's given you some naming standards that you really need to change to be able to make this followed later on by another developer. So the best thing to do is to expand all of your entities inside your tree and go through and rename these. So if I get up my properties window, I can come back in here and I'll start at the top and I'll bubble my way down. So really, rather than just having BDC model 1, I'm actually going to call it cars BDC model. And I'm just going to replace everywhere where it's kind of too generic. So you'll hear that now I can call that car entity, and then immediately we've got this, which is going to be the namespace of this BDC models 1. So we can actually change that namespace if we like to car BDC model. Now bubbling down into here we have what we call a read item. So that would be like if we wanted an instance of a car based on an ID. So what we're going to do here is I've just got some XML on the desktop, which I'm going to drag into this project. I'm just going to open that for you. And essentially what we're seeing here is that it's a collection of cars, and each car has its own unique identifier. And then there's various elements which define what that entity should be like. So I'm just going to make sure that the name of this matches. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to set the identifier 1 to ID, so that's unique. And you'll see here that that's picking up this identifier, which is part of this area here. So I'm actually going to rename that identifier so that it matches our XML. So that's now identifier 1. If I come into our parameter here for this read item now, you'll notice that it's automatically changed the identifier here for me as well. The next thing is, once we've passed in that ID, is we want to actually return something from it as well. So you'll see here that we have this entity 1, which isn't linked to the entity name that I've changed here straight away. So it's always good just to change that here in the return parameters. And you'll see here that the entity 1 is also hanging on here. So what we need to do here is go through and rename these things. So we're actually going to call this car entity. And now what we realize is that we've got an identifier that we're going to return. So we obviously want to return the ID just in case we reference it later on. So we need to change that to ID to match. And you'll notice it's automatically picked up. That's the ID. Now this one message is different, but really we want to just change that to what the other values are we have in our XML service. So I'm going to come in here and we have a name and we have a manufacturer. So I'm just going to reuse this property and call that name. And you see that it's picked up the string. And I'm going to add another one and we're going to call that manufacturer. And you'll see now that that's all we need to change in here. And what that allows me to do now is modify our next method so it's very similar, because we don't need to pass an ID because the read list is going to return all of them. But we still want our entity 1 to be the same as here. So what we can do here is if I right click and go copy, I can select that node here, which is the equivalent, and click paste. Sorry. If I delete that and I click paste on the list, that will actually create my entity here, exactly the same as what this one is. And what we can do here with the entity list is we'll just change that to car entity list. And you'll see here that there will need to be a change in the type down here. So car entity. And sometimes it's easier with those properties just to pull up Notepad and pick it out that way. So you can see straight away that by renaming a lot of these things, it can get a bit tricky with the references and it's not updating those things for you on the fly. Now we have that's set up our mappings between our entity and between the BDC methods that we actually want. Now we do actually want to do one more entity, which is an update. So we'll be able to pull in an entity, we'll be able to grab a collection of the entity, but we also want to do an update. So what we do here is we just come in here, and if I just expand that, you'll see it a bit better. Is that if I go add a method, you'll see I can create an updater method. And what that gives me straight away is a car entity that we passed in. So you'll see here that it's automatically picked that up for me with those fields correct. And then the other thing we want to do is we need to add one extra parameter for this to work on the update. So if we come down here, and you can either, you have to actually add them in here. So we want to add another parameter, and what we actually want to call this parameter here is the ID, and we want to make sure that we map it. We map that identifier column to the ID, but the trick is with this updater is we want to set that to true. Without that, you're going to get some errors on the handback. So that really gives us those things. That's all the mappings now between the entities going into these methods from the SharePoint layer. But now what we need to do is actually work out what's going to go on below the surface. So we need to go in and edit the code behind for these things. So I come in here and I go view code, and now at this point I can actually minimize the toolboxes, and you'll see here that it's already started to build up some code for us. And you'll see that it's lost this car entity that we're talking about in our model. And the reason for that is it automatically generated to entity 1, but we've changed the name of it. So we need to come in here now and change the name of this to carentity.cs. And you should see now that that's changed that. And now that it's all resolved. The other thing we need to do is in here is rename these to what we did in our model. So obviously there is a bit of work here, plumbing work, involved in building these things. Tidy up as we go. And once we've got that done, the easiest thing to do is I've got some pre-prepared code that I wrote that will actually read an item in from this XML file. So I'm just going to add these using XML link, and I'm going to add another namespace here so that we can do our querying as well. Now I have this get data command which I'm going to add as well, and effectively what I've got is I've got a file URI to the XML file within this project. Now obviously if this was being deployed to production or whatever, you would want that in a location somewhere else, but for now we're going to do that, and we're just going to load that in using XML to link. And what we're going to do is we're going to load for a read item. We've got an ID being passed in, and we're going to select that element, and we're going to build up those properties, and we're going to return it as a method. And we'll do a similar thing with a read list. So we'll come into here and we'll go read list. So we'll grab the element, and this time we're going to populate all these things into a new car entity. And we're going to return that entire collection. Now you see here it's actually built these again, and it's doubled them up. So what we need to do is actually we're just going to delete those because they won't compile like that. Because it's building those as you create or modify those methods. It's not been intelligent enough to overlay these ones. So now what we need to do is with this update procedure, oh, that's the wrong one because we want the one we're passing through the two parameters. Is simply with that one we're going to pull the data, we're going to get the parameter which we know is the ID, and we can actually rename that in here from the word parameter to just calling it ID. And this is where you kind of start realizing you've got to juggle a few windows here to get those things to go. So that's going to be now ID. If I save that, hopefully in the background it's changed that parameter that's coming in there. And you now see that if I add those things in, that it's going to set those, and I'm just going to call a save on the XML. So hopefully in theory when we call the update procedure on an item in SharePoint, it'll push that all the way through. So now we have that. We should actually be able to build that. We can come back to our model and we can actually go validate on that, and it's happy and it's come up with no errors. So now we can deploy this to our farm. So on this Visual Studio environment here, I'm actually sitting on a server inside a virtual machine where SharePoint's present. So you can see here what it's actually doing is it's deploying this solution package to this environment. It's automatically going through and recycling the application pool. It doesn't have to retract because I've never done this solution package before because it's brand new. And it's added and deployed, and there's no activating features to be necessary, so it's all there done. So if I jump into my solution management now in my central administration, you'll see that when I refresh, it's happily gone away and deployed that for me. And inside my SP210 site where it's deployed it to, if I go create now, this page will load up. Now because it's done an application iOS recycle, it will take a little while for this to wake back up again. And so you see the new create list windows with the Silverlight goodness. So we're going to select an external list, click create. And in here we're going to just call this cars. And this is the important bit on the external list, is selecting the external content type. And you'll see here that we've got our BDC model 1, so we did miss renaming it somewhere. If we click OK, and we click create, this will go away and provision that list, and you'll actually see that it's automatically come up and it's loaded that data from that XML file. Now, just to show you that I'm not cheating, I'm going to come into my XML file here, and in the back end put my favourite car of all time in there. If I do a refresh, you'll see that it automatically goes back through, and when it executes that method, on the fly it's pulling that. Also, if I come in here now and in my ribbon I select the context of items and go edit, I can change this to another Ferrari and click save. That will change in this window, but if I now go into my XML file, oh, there's been a change and it's updated my XML in there. So what I'm really trying to demonstrate here is, although there was a bit of plumbing here to expose that XML file, from an end user perspective, they're using a common interface that they're used to seeing. So they can come in here and they can see their items, and they can edit the items directly in here. They can, in their list settings, they can create views. So if there's lots of data in here, they can filter and sort and group, just like they did in 2007. And they can email links to these things as references. And it also allows them to surface this information up as web parts with list view web parts on intranet pages. And even more so is that we can start doing mashups between different data sources coming from external content types on one page, where you may select the ASDIM in Vanquish, which is coming from this data source we've provided, and then 3 other web parts might update from the CRM system where someone's been interested in the Vanquish model. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of how powerful this business connectivity services stuff is. Okay, although I showed you in that presentation how you can actually create these BDC models, I did actually find and come across an error with these as I was deleting my projects and retracting my solutions and re-adding them. So I just thought I'd just show you the process of me debugging this error, because I think it might help guys in the future. So effectively I've got my model here and I've wanted to redeploy it after doing a full retract on a solution. So I select deploy off my menu, and you'll see here that it's retracting, it's adding, and it's deploying my solution. And you'll see now that it actually comes back with an error. It says error occurred in deployment step add solution, object reference not set to an instance of an object. Error was encountered at or just before line 9 and position 10. Now the problem with that is it doesn't really give you a good indication of what file the error has occurred on within that solution. And the output here is basically showing exactly the same thing. So at first I thought I was a bit stumped, because this error can come up for all sorts of reasons and for all sorts of contexts. So the first thing I did was I downloaded the ULS viewer tool, which is available on code.msdn.com, and you can come in here and go file open from, and you go ULS logs, and by default it will go and find in the registry where your log files are being written to, and just click OK. What this will start doing is writing out everything that's going on in the ULS log files, and if I uncheck those ones so I only get my exceptions and run through this again, you actually see I get that error, but then if I have a look in here, you should see that I get my object reference not set to an instance as an object, and you see that that appears up there. Now if I just explore that a bit more, you'll actually see that there's a bit more of an error here in terms of what's going on. And it says ignoring line of business system with name cars BDC model and its line of business system instances as it is already loaded in the current context. So I wasn't sure what was happening there, because in the current context I had actually removed all those solutions. So if I come into my central administration, and while it's doing that, I was just going to try and find, okay, doesn't show it there, but if I come into here, and if I go into my solution packages in my system setting, or solution manage farm solutions, you'll see that I actually got an error when I deployed that WSP file. Now there's no other cars.bdc model that I've deployed, so you should have cleaned everything up. But when I click in here, you actually see the installation of the features failed during deployment of the solution, and I get this error message here, which is the same as what's in the ULS file. So the solution package actually failed, and it did actually give you that straight into the context into Visual Studio, which sometimes it never used to do in 2007, so that's definitely a bonus from that perspective. But what we're looking for is what that error is on between line 9 and position 10. So what I wanted to do is effectively check that that BDC model isn't there for some other reason. It's hung onto itself even though the solution packages have all been rolled out. So what I need to do is go into Manage Service Applications, because the Business Connectivity Services is part of one of the service applications, and we're going to go into the Business Data Connectivity pages. So if you click on that link there, that'll actually take you through, and you'll see here that the BDC model doesn't exist in here either. So I was really getting stumped at this level. So then I came back into the ULS logs to try and work out what was going on there, and there didn't appear to be any issues here, other than the fact of getting that object reference set to an instance of an object. So then I started looking for the WISP here. I'm searching away, and that was the only mention I could find of that feature. And this error really didn't give me any indication of what was going on. But what I noticed is that if I have a look in the SharePoint root, among those features, and look for the features folder, feature 1, you'll actually see that cars.bdc model, which is the name of the solution package, and then underscore with the feature 1, are both there, even though I've actually rolled those solution packages out. And in a previous ULS logging, when I was logging this and trying to deploy it, I actually managed to get a different error by forcing that to deploy again. And hopefully I'll be able to show you this error again, but it wasn't coming up every single time. No, now I'm still getting this object reference not set to an instant object, and this there was a fatal error with the metadata, and there was a feature receiver assembly here, so it's the same pattern of errors there. But I have actually got proof of this because I do keep snapshots of these things. And what you'll actually see is that in my snapshots, the error I got was that the solution deployment error feature in installation failed for solution cars.bdcmodel.wisp. A feature with ID but has already been installed in this farm. Use a force attribute to explicitly reinstall this feature. And there was a feature installation failed, removing global config objects. So you can see here that that didn't actually come up in those logs from what I can see. Let's have a look. No, it didn't. So to overcome this error, because we've cleaned out the solution and different things, the only real way to do this is to actually remove those features from the SharePoint root, because they shouldn't be there anyway. So I'm actually going to just physically delete those two. And now what we should find is to get this to pick that up, ideally you should do an IIS reset, because then it reads all the SharePoint root files all over again. And now what we should find is when we do this deployment, because those features don't exist, it should actually clear those out. Okay, and yet I'm still getting the error, so that theory got absolutely forwarded there. And the error messages are exactly the same. So the next thing I was going to try and do after doing that was to have a look inside in the SharePoint 2007 in the management shell, was to actually have a look at what features are registered on those site collections, because it must be hanging on to that. Now what I could do is come in here and actually change the GUID in here for that property in the package thing here. And you'll see if I get up the manifest file that there will actually be a feature GUID here that I can try and remove or adjust, but I would like to try and clean this out of the system. So with the help of STSADM, I should be able to list out the features that are available on the farm. And you have the install feature, but what we're after is what features are actually in there. Now unfortunately there isn't an enum features here, much like there is for enum solutions and enum templates. And we have the install feature, but we don't appear to have a delete feature. So it's very hard to clear those things out. Now we have got another tool that we can use, which I've got installed in this environment. Or I thought I had it installed in this environment. No, I haven't. But we can try just having a look at our servers here in our Server Explorer within Visual Studio to see whether it's going to list those features for us. But unfortunately the scope here is from a site collection or a web application down. So there's no mention of the cars one there. So there's somewhere in the system it seems to just be hanging on to that feature ID. So the only thing we can really do is, if we think it still exists somewhere, is to actually rename our model so that it's completely unique in the system. So I'm just, for sake of sakes now, just going to call that BDC model 1, but and we'll just call that car model 1, and we'll change the name of the line of business instance to 1 as well, just to make sure that we're unique. And the entities, the name of the entity should be fine. So I'm going to click OK on that, and now I'm going to deploy this. So it's retracting it, adding the solution package back in again. And if we go to the output window, you'll see that progress as it goes through. And you'll see now that it's actually deployed that. So when we go in and have a look at our external content types and go refresh, it's done an IIS reset, so it's going to have to warm that web application up again to display that. And I think what the issue is that if you create, and because I've been doing demonstrations with multiple Visual Studio projects with different features, if you create the same line of business system name instance, even if you've retracted the solution, it seems to hang on somewhere to that instance. So you'll see now that it's actually deployed that. So now if I go into my demo website, wrong VM, we should be able to now just create a list directly off this new BDC model. So I think what we need to do is wait for Microsoft to give us some guidance on this approach of deploying something in a solution package via a project with this BDC model and retracting it, and then possibly redeploying that inside a different solution package. There appears to be some hiccups around there. Now, it could have in the PowerShell module gone to the SP farm object and iterated through those features to see whether I can actually list out that feature that is still hung on to from my previous project. But I suspect that it won't be there. So somewhere in the system it's holding on to that original BDC model reference somewhere. And I definitely ensured that I didn't have any lists where I was creating them in during the demos and deleting them, that they weren't in there either. So if I come in here now and go create, and select my external lists, call this cars, and we pick our content, external content type. We should be able to now see that we've got that car model 1. If we click create on that, and now our list works. So it's just something to be very wary of when you're demoing the BCS at this level, is that you are careful when you're creating new projects from scratch and using the same line of business name, that you don't get tripped up by the same mistake I did when I was doing my demos live in the same environment. So hopefully that was of interest to you guys. What I would say now though is that there's plenty of resources out there, and Microsoft done an exceptionally good job of getting content out there early for SharePoint 2010, considering it's not going to be released until the first half of 2010. In November there was all this information straight on sharepoint.microsoft.com, where there's lots of high-level overviews from IT pros, for information workers and for developers. I would say if you're going to subscribe to any blog and you're interested in SharePoint, that you subscribe to the blogs.msdn.com/SharePoint blog, which the product team post regular posts on what's happening in the SharePoint world from their perspective. But also to go and get your hands dirty and download the SDK, which is available, to check out the Developer Center, where they have lots of webcasts on the different technology that's coming out, and also to check out the hands-on labs that are available to download and to run through on the various streams of SharePoint from a development perspective. There's also a great developer white paper on there, which goes through what's new in SharePoint 2010 and Visual Studio 2010 for developers, and also there's a SharePoint 2010 forum where you got the ability to ask questions, and Paul Andrew and Arpan and Bill Bauer and those guys are extremely quick at getting back to you with answers, which is just great for the community. And from an IT Pro perspective, there's also a 2010 Tech Center where they go through a lot of the architecture decisions and how to install the product. From the actual community outside of the Microsoft space, we have the SharePointDevWiki.com, which is something I facilitate and the community collaborate on, and it's getting bigger. Some things that may be of interest is the 12 factors to turn ASP.NET developers into SharePoint developers. I go through some key points there. And there's a great getting started page there in terms of all the resources that are available, and summing those up so that it's not so much of a minefield for you guys. And also there's a key area where we talk about what's changed and what's new inside SharePoint 2010. And we're slowly building that up as we go along. And also in terms of have they fixed the things. So when we have a look at the Dev Wiki, if I just bring that up, you'll see that when I jump into the 2010 area, down the side here I can actually see things like what's changed in the toolset. So I can come into Visual Studio, and you can see now that there's the developer dashboard is available, and there's F5 debugging, and you can import WSP files straight from SharePoint Designer and things like that. But we can also see things that are commonly asked, which is around have they improved things. So have they improved the accessibility standards, or have they improved the blog platform within SharePoint 2010, or the disposal of SharePoint API objects. So there's lots of information there for you guys to peruse through, and obviously because it's a community, it's an open community thing, feel free to go in there and add those things as you go through. And obviously that will grow over time as more information comes out. The other great resources out there is things like Mark Miller's EndUserSharePoint.com, where he gets guest authors to post things relevant to information workers, and just recently there's been a lot of great stuff around JavaScript and jQuery on there for accessing stuff inside SharePoint 2007, which is great. These guys at SharePoint Reviews have done a really good job of bringing up lots and lots of information around products that are out there and encouraging the community to go and add their reviews of those products to help make the decisions easier for the business decision makers on what tools they should be purchasing for their environment. And then the guys at SharePoint Pod Show have got a great pod show out there, but there are plenty of others out there. But that was just one of the strong ones that is frequently adding new content. And they've also recently built a SharePoint Overflow site, which is it's exactly the same as a Stack Overflow platform, but it's specific to SharePoint, and there's a lot of keen guys on there that, again, very much like the MSDM forums, will help you answer your questions. So if you've got any more recommendations of what you want to see in the webcast in the future, please feel free to give me a ping on my email or via my Twitter account. And also, I do encourage you guys to collaborate more on the SharePoint Dev Wiki as well. Until next time, thanks very much.